The Tyrrell 901 is one of my favourite Formula 1 cars. It pioneered the raised nose concept that was to become standard from the late 90s on. This video I'll be looking at the raised nose concept specifically. Addressing the other aspects of the car and its historical context will be left to another time. The raised nose simply means that the leading edge of the nose is higher than the wing profile that it supports. Described by Postlethwaite as a dihedral wing, because airplanes are upside down, means that the traditional wing attachment method could be repositioned. Before, the wing elements that pass through the nose were at the same height, just like this Leighton House CG901. However, the Leighton House designed by Adrian Newey was also more advanced than others, with an integrated lower wing profile for the nose. The actual innovation that enabled the raised nose was how it interfaces with the floor. Again, looking at the Leighton House, the underside of the chassis blended into the leading edge of the flat floor, which was required to be flat between the front and rear wheels. On the Tyrrell, the chassis joined the floor after the leading edge and on the upper surface of the floor. This means that the geometry is now unconstrained by the floor's leading edge. Using these streamlines gives the first indication that the flow around the Tyrrell is different. The fact that the messy air from the front wheel wake is pushed outboard is more of a function of the wing end plates design. However, you can also see that the vortex created by the front wing end plates is being pulled under the floor at the rear on the 901, but not the Tyrrell. This will be important later. For these simulations, I was able to extract the floor surface from the Tyrrell. For whatever reason, it didn't work for the Leighton House, and I spent too much time on it, and this video was late already, so it never ended up happening. So the floor on its own contributed 2065 newtons of downforce. However, the body produced 410 newtons of lift. Adding the floor and body together gave 2550 newtons of downforce, comparing that to the Leighton House 901 with 1537 newtons. That is, the Tyrrell's floor and body is 30% more effective than the 901, even though the 901 has a more advanced diffuser. Here is a table of numbers for the few that are interested, but we aren't comparing everything about these two cars exactly. For example, the Tyrrell's front wing has separation issues that I haven't tried to resolve, and it isn't running in high downforce mode, whereas the 901 front wing is in a high downforce configuration. The rear wing again has separation issues, however, it is in a high downforce configuration. Spent a bit of time trying to get the profile of the triple element wings to closely represent the actual car, but I did it without the supports. Adding the supports blew everything up. There is some interesting stuff here that I'll look at another time. The rear wing of the 901 doesn't have the supports attached to the main profile and has a dual element beam wing which has the supports. Even though it's in a medium downforce configuration, it produces 20% more downforce. The pressure maps on the floor illustrate they are functioning very differently. The line integral convolution graphic in the diffuser shows that the 901 looks better, with clear, symmetrical lines with apparent structure. However, the Tyrrell has a much larger pool of low pressure area, reflecting the difference in downforce numbers for the body and floor. A plot down the center line indicates the actual low pressure of the 901 is lower at negative 2367. Compared to negative 2313 for the Tyrrell at the diffuser mouth, an indication that the 901 has a better diffuser. I like this plot along the center line because it gives you a good indication of the characteristics of the car. You can see the front wing, body and floor interactions. Another interesting graphic is the YZ velocity magnitude map from under the car. Dark means no Y or Z velocity, and bright means high YZ velocity. It's mostly Y velocity here. So what's going on here? The diffuser works better for the Leighton House, producing a higher peak of low pressure, but overall it has lower downforce. My thinking it has something to do with the floor edge. Comparing the edges, there is a high pressure spot in front of the rear wheels of the 901 that the Tyrrell doesn't have. These floor edges are not sophisticated and aren't going to get sophisticated for many years. Apparent with the Tyrrell is the amount of flow pushed to the sides. It is also rotating, reminiscent of the Y250 vortex from the 2009 cars that became heavily exploited. If this is the reason why, there are two reasons why this works. This slice pressure map shows that there is a high pressure zone above the floor that indicates the flow, and therefore the vortex is going to be pushed out to the side. There is also the addition of a strong vortex present. The LIC graphic makes this more apparent. This brings me to the second and way more complicated reason. First, I thought it was the vortex structures running alongside the floor that had a lateral velocity, and therefore momentum preventing air being pulled underneath the floor. The sliced Y velocity map clearly shows that the vortex structures present alongside the Tyrrell, but not the 901. This map also shows the direction of the rotation, with the closest vortex rotating clockwise on the left, which should mean that the air is prevented from flowing underneath the car. But the Y velocity underneath the floor is actually higher. Running a plot along the side of the floor indicates that the velocity both laterally and longitudinally is higher, which makes sense for the X direction, but not necessary for the Y velocity. The actual plot suggests two things are happening. That is, due to the fact that there's two distinct slopes, starting and stopping at around 75 cm forward of the rear axle. As I had no idea what this was, I seeded streamlines forward and backwards along this edge. This is a great example of why CFD is so powerful. The result is there is two distinct flow origins affecting the floor edge. And for both cars, the origin of the flow to the side floor regions is very different, such that the primary reason the 901 doesn't function as well as the Tyrrell is the front wing end plate vortex breaks down on the side pod's leading edge. The remnants of this vortex is slow-moving air that is pulled under the floor and is ingested into the diffuser. But unfortunately, Tyrrell never had the resources to develop this idea, dropping it a couple of years later. It was then Benetton that picked up this concept, and in 1994 claimed its first championship. Lastly, here in an image that I can't credit that's been floating around the internet of a McLaren in 1990 testing this concept and doing it all wrong.